guys, I'm Amy and I'm your nonfiction feminist. If you've noticed a slight change on the shelf behind me, I've rearranged some things. I have some little signs on the sections. That is for another video project that I'm working on. Hopefully I can show it to you guys later this week. Anyways, into the video. Hopefully from today's title you have guessed that I am talking about some overhyped books today. I already have a video on underrated books. I will put that in the cards. Hopefully I am pointing in the right direction. I will get this eventually. So, as usual, please like, subscribe, and be my friend, and ring the notification bell so you can keep up with my content. And let's get into the books that I have some opinions on. First off, we have Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Yes, I realize this is one of his most popular books ever. And let me start this discussion by saying how I read the book. So, until the last year, I wasn't really into audiobooks. It's not the way that I typically process information. Like, if I'm listening to an audiobook while doing another activity like chores or something at first, it's just like my mind would get lost in its thoughts of the day and I would completely lose track of the story. I have gotten much better about that. This year I've really enjoyed audiobooks. I've come a long way as far as actually paying attention, but it's still something that I have to practice with, and Stephen King was maybe not the best way for me to be listening to audiobooks, because if you know Stephen King, you know that a lot of his books, Salem's Lot as an example, have a pretty overwhelming number of characters that are discussed, and with the number of characters, there were times that I kind of lost track of the story. But a lot of my feelings on Salem's Lot come from my absolute love of Dracula by Bram Stoker. It's the book that popularized the vampire, that really kind of made the vampire what it was. And as much as I love that book and as much as I've reread it, I honestly feel that Salem's Lot took far too much from the Dracula story. There are so many parts of the plot that follow along with the Dracula plot that it really took away a lot of the originality, or what was supposed to be the originality of the story of Salem's Lot. All of this said, I will be rereading it at some point, probably in the next year. I feel that I need to give it like a second chance as an actual physical book rather than listening to an audiobook, and maybe I would get more out of it. For all I know, my feelings will change a lot when I read the physical book. Maybe I'll really like it. As it stands, I think it's far too similar to Dracula. I think Stephen King has done more original things as far as a town kind of being pitted against itself. I think Needful Things did a better job. As far as the vampire story, I think that Dracula did a better job. So that's what I've got for you on this one. Next up will be my most controversial discussion, I think, and I've done a lot of thinking about how I'm going to talk about this. But another overhyped book for me was Educated. So, this book, it was like all over Bookstagram, it was all over BookTube, and I'm thinking this sounds really interesting. She's a survivor of abuse, she grew up with survivalists, the book cover looks really cool, like I really want to read this. And I read it, and I was really underwhelmed. It wasn't a bad book. Like, the writing is fine. It's something that she went through in life that she's talking about. But to me, her story isn't special. And let me get into that a little more. I work at a residential treatment facility for kids, like teenagers who are dealing with mental illness. A lot of that stems from PTSD from abuse. And it's a hard thing for me to talk about and try not to make myself sound like a terrible person. But I know so many kids who have been through worse events in life at significantly younger ages And I'm thinking maybe part of the reason that I really didn't get a lot out of Educated is that maybe I'm just desensitized to these experiences. I have seen backstories for kids that I know that make this look like one of the best ways ever to grow up. And so coming from that experience, yes, I'm probably super desensitized to this story, and that's got to be a huge reason why I didn't enjoy it. Besides that, again, the writing was average. It wasn't great. It wasn't bad. And at the end of the day, I'm just thinking, why Educated? Why Tara Westover? What was it about this book that really gripped people, that really got people to read it? Personally, I put a lot of it down to marketing. You gotta admit, that pencil cover was really well done. Maybe it was the survivalist aspect. Maybe people just really love to read a tragedy when they come across one. Which, I mean, that is the way that people go. A Child Called It was a hugely popular book, despite the fact that it was a very traumatic book to read. People love trauma. People love reading terrible stories. I don't know if it makes them feel better about themselves. I don't know. Educated was just a really underwhelming memoir for me, and I was kind of expecting more out of it. Do with that what you will. My third book kind of goes back to the Stephen King conversation. Third book is Nosferatu by Joe Hill. The basics for me on this one was that this story was just too much. It was way too long-winded. You could have cut so much out of this book and you still would have gotten a really interesting story. I enjoyed the premise of the story. Kind of like his dad, and that sometimes he really just needs an editor. I will say this is the only Joe Hill book that I have read so far. I wouldn't mind reading some of his other stuff. But another thing with this book was I really felt cheated by the title. A big thing around the word Nosferatu, the name Nosferatu, is that it's another word meaning like vampire or Dracula. It's something like that. And while this book played with the vampire concept, I was looking to read this book for more of a traditional vampire. Those are the vampires that I enjoy more, rather than this kind of symbolic vampire. Personally, I have a problem with Joe Hill himself writing as Stephen King's son. There is a part in the book where they talk about a map of like different areas of the country, but they're like places that aren't in our world. It's kind of like this other world, this parallel dimension sort of a place. And one of the places on the map is called Pennywise's Circus. Permission from King or no, it kind of feels plagiaristic to be taking ideas from your dad and writing them into your own book. I really would have liked it better if that had not been included and he just solely relied on himself for that book, not his dad. So it wasn't what I was looking for, and it was too long. So I do think it's like vastly overhyped for those reasons. And then we have Crazy Rich Asians. Not the single book, the entire series. I don't mind a gossipy book. I don't mind a dramatic book, a dramatic story. I have guilty pleasure reads of celebrity news. Like, I like the gossip every now and then. It's interesting. But as much as I really did enjoy the first book, I was exhausted by the second and third book. Because by the time you're getting halfway through the series, like, I realize each of these books is the same. Like, they follow a slightly different storyline, but it's the same stuff over and over again. And I don't mind flawed characters. I love a good flawed character. I love a good unlikable character. But I also like character growth and character advancement through a story. And these terrible people who rely on money for everything and who think that they're all powerful, they never, ever learn from their past mistakes. And that just got exhausting. I go through book 2 and book 3, and it was like I just reread book 1 again. For another thing, Rachel and what's the guy's name? They're kind of shown off as the main characters of the book. They were barely in the books at all, considering that the books revolved around them. Honestly, I would have enjoyed this whole series so much more if it was a single book all about Astrid. As far as I'm concerned, she was the only complex and interesting character in the entire series. And then we have the ultimate of all overhyped books. The most overhyped book that I have ever seen. The worst of the overhyped books. Do I really need to talk about this one? The writing sucks. There's a huge misrepresentation of BDSM and what it means, and the people who are involved in it. BDSM stands for bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, sadism, and masochism. The writing sucks. The whole book is centered around a very abusive relationship. A character is drastically changed from book 1 to book 3, and while people do change over time, they don't change dramatically, and they don't usually change their core characteristics. So that was really unbelievable for me. You can't take people on as projects, and that's what Anna did with Christian. And his character has so vastly changed its values by the end of the series. But people don't inherently change. They change a little bit throughout time, but the core being of themselves does not change. And for him to go from point A to point C is not realistic, and you can't let people think that that's what a healthy relationship looks like. Most second graders can write a better sentence and a better book than this woman can. I am a reader who is extremely focused on writing style in order to enjoy my books. And let me tell you, the woman cannot write. So that is it for my list of overhyped books. Please talk to me in the comments below about books that you think are overhyped. Maybe even about books that I've read and loved that you think are overhyped. Please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media, or be my enemy. That's fine too. Leave your love and hate comments down below. I will see you in my next video. Bye, friends.